Have you ever walked into a room full of strangers and everyone else is already talking to someone? You feel awkward and you don't know what to do with yourself. It's enough to make even the most extrovert of people shake in their boots. And it's what we tend to think about when the topic of networking to increase private practice inquiries comes up. It's no wonder that therapists tend to avoid networking, and yet it's one of the most effective ways of getting word-of-mouth referrals. Welcome to the Good Enough Counsellors Podcast. I'm Josephine Hughes, and today we're going to cover the topic of networking. But first, before you press pause, let me reassure you, it's not about attending business breakfasts with high-powered, scary, executive-type people. There's so much more to networking than that. And in this episode, I'm going to explain why it's a helpful marketing tool and different ways that you can build and make the most of your networks. And also how to approach networking opportunities if you're an introvert or you're a therapist who prefers one-to-one settings. This is my anniversary episode, believe it or not. This is episode 54. I've been going for a whole year. It rather confused me because I thought there was 52 weeks in a year. But the episodes include the trailer and the fact that I'm now done a whole year and this is like episode 1 of the next year. When I look back at my podcasting journey, this podcast wouldn't have happened without the Gloriously Unready podcast. And the reason the Gloriously Unready podcast happened is because I had some coaching. I really do believe in the power of coaching, and that's why I run Therapy Growth Group. At the moment in the group, we're doing our 12 Action Steps programme. When this episode comes out, we'll have been working on our profiles for a month. And very soon, we're going to start the third month of our 12 Action Steps programme. And in the third month, there's several different things that you can choose to do. So last week, you will have heard from Katrina, who was talking about how she's used her Facebook page to increase her inquiries. So what I've got in the group is a action step section that deals with social media. But also, for those of you who aren't keen to use social media and would prefer to do something that's less techy, I'm actually running a whole stream on how to increase your word-of-mouth referrals. And this is why I'm thinking about networking in this particular episode. So if this episode whets your appetite for networking, why not think about joining Therapy Growth Group? Because we're just about to run a whole month on deepening networking connections and how to do it. So if you want to have encouragement and some advice on what to do each week, now would be a great time to join, not only because we'll be covering this all this month, but also if you wanted to join next month, the price will have gone up. So I'm putting the price up from the beginning of April. Just go along to josephineHughes.com/therapy-growth-group-offer or click on the link in the show notes. Why do I think networking is important? I think one of the things that we tend to do is ignore the opportunities that are actually right in front of us. And most of us do this. We start up our private practice and we set up a profile on a commercial directory website like Psychology Today or Counselling Directory. And then we wait. And we can get quite frustrated while we're waiting because it might take time before people actually contact us. And the reason it might take time is that it takes a lot for someone to trust a person that they've just seen on the internet. It's said that you need to see someone online quite a few times before you're prepared to contact them. Whereas when you're using networking, what tends to happen is people will make referrals to you and they'll recommend people to you. The reason why people are prepared to make recommendations is they already have a relationship with you. what we try and build up is something called the know, like and trust factor. And when people are looking, say, on counselling directory, they don't really know you, they're not sure whether they like you, and they may not trust you, especially on the first reading. Sometimes they feel you might be trustworthy by looking at something like your profile picture, because a picture speaks 1,000 words. So sometimes that can be a really effective way of showing that you are trustworthy. People will like your face and feel as though there's somebody you can talk to. And if you've been in practice for any length of time, you probably have had that sort of feedback. But word of mouth recommendations don't need to rely on how you look. Because the person who's recommending you has already got that relationship with you. And usually if they're recommending you, they'll do so quite warmly, and they will probably tell a little story about you, and it makes you seem much more real. So an example of this might be, oh yeah, I know Josephine. She's done this podcast all about how her children came out as transgender. It's a really interesting podcast. I'm not saying this to promote my podcast, I'm just imagining what someone might say. She's really open about the way she feels, so I reckon she'd really get how you were feeling. Here's her details. That's what happens when someone tells a little story about you. So word of mouth referrals can be very powerful, and certainly in my experience, when I've had people who've recommended me, what's happened is I'll get a contact from someone. They won't have gone anywhere else to look. They know that they want to speak to me because I come highly recommended by someone who they know, like and trust. That's how word of mouth recommendations work, and they are probably one of the most powerful ways of getting referrals. But we don't particularly make the most of networking opportunities in order to build up those recommendations. And the reason is that picture that I described at the start, the idea of having to go to some sort of high-powered business breakfast and there's people talking profit and loss and this, that and the other, and you just think, actually, you know what I'm really interested in is listening to people's problems. I'm not really into this sort of business talk. And you can feel like you just don't belong in those sorts of environments. And that tends to be the picture that we've got of networking. But what I want to say today is networking is so much more than that. And actually, the fact that you're listening to this probably means you are already in some sort of network. And it may well be that you're in my Good Enough Counsellors Facebook network, or you might be in a network where someone's actually recommended the podcast to you. So without even realising, you are actually already in quite a few networks, and it's about making the most of those networks. And maybe when you're feeling a little bit braver, you might consider extending your networks, and we're going to talk about that too. Essentially, what you're doing when you're in a network is you're getting to know people and they're getting to know you. And particularly in professional networks, this can work really well. We all know that we get inquiries from people who it isn't appropriate for us to help, perhaps because of a dual relationship. So counsellors quite often are looking for people to refer clients to. And it might be that I might get an inquiry, it's not a dual relationship, but it's an area that I don't particularly deal with. So I'll be looking for someone who I can refer to. This is the reason why professional therapy networks can be so powerful for getting more referrals. And indeed, there's people who perhaps hang out in Facebook groups, who post or comment quite regularly. They get well known within a particular Facebook group, and that in itself can lead to people getting in touch, direct messaging them and saying either, could I give your name to my client, or are you available to see me online? So that's one way that a professional network might work for you. And what it does is it can help to enhance your professional credibility. So if you're going into groups and you're talking about an area of expertise, an area where perhaps you specialise, for example, it could be something around neurodivergence or emotional eating or a particular type of grief. But people will get to know that that's your particular area, and they may well want to refer people to you because they know that that's something that you're quite knowledgeable about. Now, the reason I'm mentioning professional networks such as in Facebook groups, or it could be on LinkedIn, or it could be via local groups that you're a member of, or it could be that you regularly attend CPD in your local area and get to know people. The reason I wanted to bring this up in a episode about networking is that it's just to break that idea that networking is about these formal networking groups that a lot of business people do. Your network can be just something that's very natural. It could be something like the group of therapists that you trained with. We all have informal networks. It doesn't have to mean formal networking events. And on that particular theme, you do have an informal network of people who you know. So these would be families, friends, acquaintances, work colleagues, people you know from social events or sporting events that you attend. These are people who are all in your informal network. Now, the advantage of trying to reach clients through this particular network is probably they don't know a huge number of counsellors. So if they know anybody who is looking for counselling, if they're aware that you're a therapist, they may well tell whoever it is that's looking that they know someone just like you and give your details. But they won't know unless you tell them. And this is where we can get really caught up in our overthinking. I think as therapists, we quite often do think quite deeply about things, and sometimes we can get caught up in a bit of overthinking about it as well. And we can tie ourselves in knots because we're worrying about our professional boundaries, we're worrying about dual relationships, we're concerned that perhaps people will think badly of us if we tell them they're a therapist. We worry about the stigma of mental health and what people might think. But your informal networks are a really powerful source of referrals. And especially if you're just starting out in private practice, this is an area which you really shouldn't ignore. No one else has access to your informal network, so why not use it? Now, I know one of the things that people really worry about is the fact that they think, well, these are my friends, families, colleagues. I don't want to be selling my service to them. So I think we need here a little reframe of what it's all about. If you think about it, what does therapy do? Therapy is the most amazing service. Therapy changes lives. If you tell people that you're a therapist, what you're doing is you're actually almost being an ambassador for therapy and what it can do. And you're allowing people to find out about the power of therapy. And you're allowing people to actually access therapy. So by spreading the word about telling people about what you do and answering any questions about what it involves, you're actually spreading the word about therapy, and ultimately it may lead to people having a life-changing experience because they come and see you, they spend time, they work through their difficulties, and they change. And also that change will ripple out to their friends, families, acquaintances, work colleagues. It's just amazing. Why would you want to keep quiet about something like that? So see if you can reframe it. See if you can make it that it's not about you being salesy or pushy. It's about you helping people. That's what it's all about. Let it roll, let it shine. It is beautiful. I'm going to move on now and actually talk about some of the more formal events that you may attend. So if you're up for some networking, as in the formal type of networking, I'm going to give you a few hints and tips to help you navigate those sorts of occasions. First of all, I just want you to think about seeing networking, again, not necessarily as being about being salesy or pushy. If you can think of it as actually this is an opportunity to make connections, and what you're going to be doing is just getting to know people, I think that can really help to take away some of the nerves about it, because none of us really want to be very salesy. And in fact, the best salespeople I have ever met are actually really lovely people. They just form a relationship with you. You get to trust them because they seem as nice as pie, and then they sell you something. And usually really sort of authentic and genuine salespeople, they actually help you make a decision. And actually, I don't object to being sold to if it's done in a really pushy way, and you can tell when people are doing it for their own purposes. It becomes really inauthentic when you can see people are sort of trying to reach their sales target. Whereas someone who seems to get to know you and is genuinely interested in you, you tend to be much more receptive to them. So those are the best sort of salespeople that I've actually met. And it feels like I could phone them up anytime and have a nice chat with them. And almost in a funny sort of way, when you're doing networking, that's what you're trying to do. You're just seeking to make friendships, to get to know people, and just seeing, it might be that they can help you. It might be that you can help them. So it's all about making connections and getting to know people. Where might you find networking opportunities? So I think if you're a therapist, it might be that you could do things like attend events that other therapists are attending, or even events that are local to you that maybe have a mixture of other professionals there. And what I've been really lucky to find in my local area is a networking group for women. And that is just a lovely, lovely place to go, because it includes all sorts of complementary therapists and healers, as well as people running small businesses that can actually help me, like design studios, for example, photographers. I've met all sorts of people through there, and I've been happy to take business cards, and I've been happy to share details of the people that I meet, because when I know people, that makes me much more likely to let other people know about them. So, for example, the last event I went to, I had a really good chat with a physio, and they have a studio that's just up the road to me. And if I ever wanted to have a physio, they'd be the people I'd go to, and I'd probably recommend them to others, because I've met the lady who's the owner, I've met one of her associates, and they were both really nice and really knowledgeable, and so I'd be happy to recommend them. That's how it works. But actually, at that particular occasion that I went to, it was in a restaurant, and by the time I arrived, it was really busy. And you know that moment where you walk in and you just think everybody else is talking. I feel like I stick out like a sore thumb. What do I do with myself? So here's some ideas as to how you can manage that situation. It helps if you've already got an idea as to what you might say if someone was to ask you what you do. And it's useful in that regard to have what they call an elevator pitch, which is a very quick way of describing what you do. If someone was to ask me what I do, nowadays I might say something like, "Hi, I'm Josephine. I'm an online coach for counsellors, and I help them with their marketing so that they can get more clients." Something very quick that just summarises what you do in one or two short sentences. If you've got that ready, it does help you with the nerves, because you don't have to think about what to say. It can just drip off the tongue, and you might like to practice it before you even go out to a networking event. The other thing that can be really helpful to remember is that often when you go to an event like that, you're not the only person who's there for the first time. There's probably going to be people there who feel as equally nervous as you do. But they're all there for the same reason, which is to get to know other people. If you hold on to that thought, it can help you to feel a little less intimidated. What I did on that particular occasion was I headed for the refreshment table. This is always a really good way to set up a conversation with people. If there's someone else there, you can just offer them the milk jug if you're having a coffee, or you can make a comment about the sweets or cakes that are on offer, or the croissants, or whatever it is that's on offer, and just strike up a really casual conversation with someone that can end up with, "Oh, tell me a bit about what you do, why are you here?" And just set up a conversation with them. If there hadn't have been a refreshment table, I think what I would have done is to have taken a moment and just had a little look around, give myself time, take a breath, And then just look and see if there's anybody else who's sort of standing on their own or on the edges of the group, because they're probably feeling just as nervous as me. Or else sort of see if there's anybody where the group's quite open and you can just pop over and just ask, oh, do you mind if I join you? If you see someone standing on their own, you can pop over and say something like, oh, what brings you here today? And this is where I think we really do have to stand on the fact that we are trained listeners. And let's face it, most people love to talk about themselves. But the wonderful advantage, when we end up listening to someone at a networking event, what we're doing is we're actually demonstrating what we do, what our skill and what our craft is. So by the very fact that you're interested in people at a networking event, you're doing what I would call show, not tell. You're not telling them you're a counsellor, you're showing them you're a counsellor. And again, if you're really interested in people and you listen well, and then you have a chance to tell them about what you do, and they may well say, oh yeah, I can see you're a counsellor because of the way you listen to me. You know, it's just making it that people are getting to know you, like you and trust you. And they'll remember you. If you've listened to them, they'll remember you. I'm sure I don't really need to give you these conversation prompts, but you could ask things like, have you come here before? That does sound like a pickup line, doesn't it? Or, you know, what's your takeaway from today so far? And if it's a professional event, ask them more about the sort of work that they do. Now, if you've been to more than one networking event, you probably will identify with this, is you can get caught by someone who won't stop talking. Again, this is where you can use all the exit strategies that you've learned with clients who won't stop talking. But you can say, oh, it's really great to get to know you and I'm going to mingle a bit more now. I hope we can connect again later. And this would be a great point to whip out your business card, because of course you've all got business cards, and just offer your business card, ask them for theirs. And also, if you have made a really good connection at an event, is to follow it up afterwards, and you can send them a quick email and just say, oh, it's so nice to speak to you today, and follow up with whatever you talked about, and just remind them that you're there if they know anybody who they might want to refer on to you. It may be that you feel like a bit of an imposter being there, but I'd just like to remind you that you are a business person as much as anybody else. You're running your own business. Remember, everyone starts somewhere. And even if other people look really confident, it doesn't mean that they feel really confident. Lots of people say to me, oh, you're so confident, Josephine. And I think if only you knew what was going on underneath. So remember to stand tall, smile, and you never know, your body might give a message to your brain that you're more relaxed than you actually think you are. It does get easier with practice. And if you've been listening to this thinking, oh, I don't think this will work, I'm going to challenge you now with some stories about people who I've worked with where it really has made a difference. If you listened to last week's episode with Katrina, she mentioned how she was at a networking event and she'd got to know someone who was starting up a radio station. Katrina was interviewed. They had a long interview all about men and mental health. And the next day, Katrina got 4 inquiries from men who were interested in therapy. Star of Another Way Counselling designed her own leaflet and shared it with her friends network. And one of her friends said, oh, I'll put that on the staff intranet. And Star got an inquiry as a result of that. And then there's Teresa. And Teresa reminded her friends about what she did. And a few weeks later, a friend got in touch and said, oh, can you send me your business details? I've got a referral for you. I hope listening to this episode has encouraged you to think about how you could reach out to people who are in your informal networks, and perhaps even think about attending some sort of formal networking event. How about seeing if you can find something that's going on in your local area? Or maybe just reach out to a fellow therapist and ask them if they'd like to meet up for a chat and a coffee. And I'd love to hear from you as well. Have you had any networking successes? Or are you fearful about networking? get in touch via email or social media. You know where to find me. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to you getting lots more clients through formal and informal means. Thanks for listening. Do come and join my Facebook community, Good Enough Counsellors. And for more information about how I can help you develop your private practice, please visit my website, josephinehughes.com. If you found this episode helpful, I'd love it if you could share it with a fellow therapist or leave a review on your podcast app. And in closing, I'd love to remind you that every single step you make gets you closer to your dream. I really believe you can do it.